Local residents have been frightened by news a killer might be loose in their neighborhood. Police found definite evidence of violence and foul play.
I couldn't sleep because I just knew that something was wrong.
We went down the basement. The first thing that we noticed was blood at the top of the stairs. That's when the body was located.
I got the sickest feeling in my stomach. I thought I was going to pass out.
Many people were scared. There was a killer on the loose.
Shortly after 8 a.m., we received a dispatch of a missing person. I was only about 4 blocks away from the house where I was dispatched to meet with Miss Neely. Upon my arrival, she explained that she had not heard from or seen her daughter, Tiffany, since the previous day. All calls to her cell phone were going unanswered.
Tiffany's mom was very anxious because this was just so not normal.
We learned Tiffany Brown was a 26-year-old mother who was attending the Ohio Beauty Academy, and this was extremely out of character for Tiffany. She was in communication with her friends, her family on a daily basis.
She also said the children of her daughter were left in the care of a neighbor the day before, and they had not been picked up. We learned she had young boys at home that she cared about, that she would not just leave alone without reason or without explanation. And that fact alone led me to believe that we had more here than just somebody that was going out for a good time on a Friday night. Tiffany's car was found at a apartment complex about 4 or 5 blocks from Miss Neely's home. The vehicle was unlocked, the keys were present. There's no indication of a struggle or anything of a violent nature within the automobile. We could not find any connection to that complex and her. It was very suspicious, and we were growing concerned. So that sinking feeling got deeper and deeper.
Tiffany was a devoted daughter and a mom. She had 2 young ones. She worked hard. She worked part-time, was going to school full-time. She just wanted to make a better life for her kids.
She loved taking the kids, going to the zoo and the water parks and the beach. It didn't matter. She was always wanting to do something.
She loved cars. She was right in there with me and clean her car, wash her car, show her how to take care of her car.
We would play this game where you could listen and tell what kind of car was coming down the street by the motor. And Tiffany was getting real good at that. She would light up a room, that's for sure. She got along with everybody. I didn't sleep all night. I couldn't sleep because I just knew that something was wrong.
The text messages that we received indicated that Sam Littleton was the last individual to speak with her. We learned Sam Littleton was Tiffany's mother, Deb Neely's boyfriend. They'd been together for 15 years, and Tiffany, of course, always knew Sam. So there was a parental relationship there with him. Sam had a conversation with her about noon on Friday the 11th, the day Tiffany went missing.
In this text conversation, he requested to meet with her. At that point, they really wanted to talk to Sam Littleton.
We had tried numerous times to get in contact with him, and he wouldn't return any calls. We couldn't locate Sam anywhere. This raised a lot of red flags. We asked her about how Sam was interacting with her during the past couple days.
Deb Neely was becoming concerned about Sam's behavior.
Deb indicated to us that he acted strange. She told us that he also had a cut on his hand. Sam told Deb that he had cut it while working on the fireplace upstairs, although Deb didn't see anything that had been changed in the fireplace.
At that point, there's a lot of red flags going off in her mind.
They had asked Deb if they could take a look around the house.
Detective Salyer and I went down the basement and took a look around. And the first thing that we noticed, actually on the landing above the stairs, was a drop of blood on a floor mat at the top of the stairs. Then we found numerous areas of blood spatter. When we continued our search of the basement, there was an area of the basement that was covered in debris. We started taking everything apart down there. That's when Tiffany's body was located. The body was partially clothed and wrapped in a large piece of carpeting. The apparent cause of death seemed to be a knife wound to the neck. There was multiple stab wounds and other indications of maybe asphyxiation.
When they found her, I got the sickest feeling in my stomach. I thought I was going to pass out. He said he looked at that wood, and he said he saw her hair. And he said then he looked again and he saw her hand.
At this point, it was pretty clear to us that Deb had no involvement.
Sam Littleton became the prime suspect. He's hiding key information from investigators, and now he's missing.
Richard and Gladys Russell were an elderly couple that lived just outside the city of Bellefontaine. One of the neighbors had gone to the Russells' house and noticed that their vehicle was missing from the garage. They'd been missing for maybe about 12 hours when they contacted law enforcement. We learned Mr. Russell did have some health issues. It was unusual for them to be gone for any length of time. The Logan County Sheriff's Office responded to the Russells' residence. There was no signs of a struggle in the main area of the house. They continued the investigation, and they were able to find a notepad. Mrs. Russell was very good at taking notes and keeping records, but there was no other entries made after the 16th. Now, prior to that, there were entries made every morning at approximately the same time where she was taking his blood pressure and caring for Mr. Russell. When they took a look in the garage, there was some blood found at the trunk area of where the car would have been parked. At that point, we're extremely concerned for the safety of the Russells.
Richard and Gladys were married in 1950. They had been together for 61 years and by all accounts were inseparable. They were relentlessly hardworking. Dick was a carpenter. Gladys was a bookkeeper. Each day when they would finish working 8-hour shifts at their different jobs, they would come home and tend to the farm during farming season. They were pillars in the community, heavily active in community groups and civic organizations. The Bellefontaine Lions Club, the Logan County Fish and Game Club, just, to name a few. They were incredible, well-rounded, generous people. And everybody that was familiar with them loved them, and they loved everybody back without condition.
Looking into the notepad, we found it had the name Sam written on it, and underneath the name Sam was Sam Littleton's cell phone number.
While digging into Sam's background, they found out that Sam had actually purchased his home in Bellefontaine from the Russells and had, on occasion from time to time, helped out with a few chores at their property.
Now that we know that there's a connection, we're extremely concerned. We believe that he's probably in their vehicle and might have the Russells with him. And also, he could be armed and dangerous, and we didn't know the extent of how far he would go.
The case blew up exponentially once they were unaccounted for. You had multiple law enforcement agencies looking for the elderly couple's vehicle as well as Mr. Littleton.
37-year-old Samuel Littleton is wanted for the murder of 26-year-old Tiffany Brown of Bellefontaine, Ohio, and linked to the disappearance of an elderly couple, Richard and Gladys Russell. A desperate plea from the family of a murder suspect.
We need you to come in. Just turn yourself in.
The suspect's father is clearly overwhelmed with emotion.
There was some nervousness. Many people were scared in the community. There was a killer on the loose. The Russell vehicle was found in the parking lot of the local store. They didn't see Sam Littleton, they didn't see the Russells. No sign except for some blood in the trunk.
So we obtained video information from the store on it. We see Sam Littleton. It showed he had purchased some camping gear and those types of items, which would indicate that somebody may be living in the mountains. But at the same time, information was relayed to us that a lineman had seen an individual living in the mountains that wasn't normally there. So West Virginia State Police went on a mission to locate this individual.
They began searching the area not too far from the store where the car was parked. They found Sam Littleton. He suddenly fled from them.
As when we continued our search, we found he had built a makeshift cave.
Basically a primitive camp where he'd been hiding out.
There was a tarp, a sleeping bag, an axe, and some very minimal food items. After maybe an hour, Sam Littleton was apprehended by a West Virginia State Police canine. He was subsequently arrested by state police.
The fugitive had been on the run since February the 18th. Littleton was taken to a local hospital before being transported to the state police barracks in Princeton.
Sam had been on the run for over a week now. He was in a hospital gown. He had injuries from the canine, and his demeanor was just beat down. Our objective was to get as much information from Sam as we could about what happened to Tiffany. And then, of course, we also wanted to be able to locate the Russells as well. It's very important to set the tone in the first few minutes of the interview. We want Sam to talk to us. And the only way to get somebody to talk to us a lot of times is we have to be nice, even though we may not want to be nice to this individual.
Go on and have a seat. Sam, I'm going to take these cuffs off. What do you think, Sam? Scared for something else? Somebody just shoot me.
The man wanted for the murder of a 26-year-old mother from Bellefontaine, Ohio, was found hiding in the woods, apparently not far from where he ditched a car stolen from an elderly couple who are still missing.
Shortly after they found Tiff, we had a prayer vigil and everybody was there. As the funeral was going on, everybody's phones started blowing up.
You could hear the people's phones going off, and they'd say, you know, we got him, we got him. It was like kind of a rejoicing when he got caught.
When Sam got arrested, there was no signs of the Russells. So we didn't know if the Russells were dead. We needed to expedite as much information as we can from Sam and hopefully locate the Russells.
Sam, obviously, we've got a million questions for you. And we realized, through this investigation, things went really wrong at some point. We just ask that you help us out, help yourself out, man.
What part is easier for you to talk about? Can you tell me what happened with Tiffany, or would you rather talk about Mr. and Mrs. Russell?
I really don't know how it got started. I think evil thoughts all the time.
Evil thoughts all the time?
All the time. I mean, that's why I keep myself away from people.
Okay.
I mean, there ain't 1 minute that I don't sit here and think about how to snap somebody's neck, crush their head. I mean, there's many, many times I could have just cut my stepmom up. Why would people think of that? Like right now, they're still in there. They're still in there. I've done a lot of bad things in my life. A lot of bad things. Well, if you're from Bell Fountain, you know my history.
To be honest, that's what's kind of confusing. I mean, you've got a couple things. Well, what I would consider very minor, with some marijuana, things like that. So you've done a pretty good job of being able to control things. You know what I mean? I mean, really, I've definitely seen a lot worse in a history.
You've seen people have thoughts like this?
Than what you have. I've heard of people telling me this before, that they've had thoughts, but I don't have any, I'll be honest, I don't have any knowledge of what that's like. So I appreciate what you're telling me, because it helps me understand where you're coming from a little bit.
So we're being honest?
Absolutely.
You know, the first thing popped in my mind?
What's that, sir?
How I can get your head to bounce off that thing back there. And I'm being honest. Why does people have thoughts like that?
He's trying to scare us. He wants to be the big bad guy here, and he wants to try to establish some point of dominance. I'm sure it was a test to see what our reaction was going to be, but we're just going to continue on with the interview and pretend like that part never happened.
I mean, why can't I have good thoughts? I mean, why can't I have good thoughts? There ain't no good thoughts. They're all evil.
I think if you dig real deep, you can find those good thoughts.
I've been digging for years.
You might have to dig real deep, but I mean, there's people out there that love you. We've talked to tons of your friends. Your friends all believe in you. I mean, they were like shocked that any of this could have ever happened with you. I mean, they really, this blows them away.
It still blows me away. I just want to crawl up in that hole and just die. That's all I want to tell you. I just want to crawl up in that hole and die. I deserve to die. I deserve to die.
You need to feel better about yourself, and the only way you're ever going to do that is to tell what happened. And all three of us know that you're a smart enough guy that you know exactly what happened. Is this something easy to talk about? Absolutely not. We all know it's extremely tough and difficult. I'm trying to make him feel like we believe he's a good person. He's got to be comfortable with us. He's got to think that we like him. If we like him, he's going to like us. And if you like somebody, you're more apt to tell them things that you don't want to tell.
See, that's kind of hard to believe, 'cause I'm a lazy dude.
I would be scared. Mike would be scared if something like this happened.
How many days ago was this?
Sam, do you remember anything about the Russells? Being at their house last week?
No, I ain't been at the Russells in a long time. Actually, me and Deb was just talking about I need to get out there and talk to them.
You know, we've got a million theories, Sam.
when it comes to the Russells, we know that the Russells liked you, and that you guys had a connection there. We've been told you would even be a nice enough guy and would go out and sometimes help the Russells around the farm, okay? Lo and behold, we find you in their car. And there's a lot that happened in between there. A lot.
We needed to find out if the Russells were deceased, so the pressure builds.
We knew he was holding back information. He knew what had happened to the Russells, what he had done to them. He's just a coward, just a monster of a person.
How'd you end up with the car, Sam? I mean, the keys to their car is in your pocket. Your fingerprints are all over that car.
What if they just went there and stole the car?
And I believe that they more than likely went with you without a struggle, because that house is immaculate.
Sam, were either Mr. and Mrs. Russell ever sitting beside you in that vehicle?
Do you deny the fact that you took Mr. and Mrs. Russell's car?
No, I got the car.
Sam, yes or no, did you kill the Russells?
No. Sam, remember, the very first thing that you told us when we sit down was, I deserve to die for what I've done. That tells us you know what you did. What's left for you is to get it off your chest. Help you feel a little bit better. Give closure to those families. You love the Russells. We know you like the Russells. They helped you. You helped them. You did work for them. The only reason why these things happen is because you got scared.
And it's so hard for you to talk about, Sam, I think, because you're a good person and this is truly eating you up.
You've wanted to do the right thing all along.
Well, why ain't I?
The right thing is not always the easiest thing to do. That's what's holding back.
Sam's withholding a lot of information, so we decided that we would focus on the relationship between Sam and Deb, and hopefully that would help Sam go ahead and open up and tell us what had happened.
Deb, Jesus, she needs closure. You know, not only did she lose her daughter, but she lost the love of her life. She doesn't know why. I don't think I'd be wrong to say, Sam, that you can't be with Deb for 18 years and not love her. But I think you can certainly tell us what happened. I think you remember just like it was yesterday.
It all started with Tiffany. And that's something you can't forget either. Can you tell me what happened with Tiffany that day?
She walked in.
Did you ask Tiffany to come down the basement with you? Or did she come downstairs on her own?
Remember arguing. And after that, it went bad. All right, Chad. Sure. You gonna get sick? Yeah.
You need some more water too, or?
Please. You all right, man? Yeah, it is. Want me to leave the door open? Come here. Ain't like I can run anywhere.
I've never had a suspect get physically ill during an interview before. He doesn't want to relive that event. He just doesn't want to talk about those things because it makes him physically ill. Everything about him is telling us that he just wants to give up. We needed to push him to keep talking.
Okay. You said something really bad happened to Tiffany, but we don't know exactly what. So I guess why does that bother you that something bad happened to her if you don't know what happened?
Because I know something happened to her. I'm having dreams.
What kind of dreams are you having?
Bad dreams. Bad dreams.
And that's why you want to die. That's guilt. You close your eyes and you see it. That's not somebody who enjoyed doing what you did. That's guilt. The only reason you feel guilty is because you do care. You do care about what Deb thinks. And you know she deserves to know what happened. Can we agree on that?
She was my whole life. I couldn't do nothing without her.
So the only thing left is just to tell what happened.
You get me back in the state of Ohio and I'll tell you everything.
Be honest with me. I get you back in the States. Am I going to be able to find the Russells? And they're together?
I can't remember that.
But you'll be able to remember when I get you back in Ohio.
I can't. I'm being honest with you. I don't know.
See, Sam, the only thing that we have to go on are the words that you tell us. And when you say stuff to us like, get me back to Ohio and I'll tell you everything, we believe you, we trust you. And then when we try to talk about it here, then you say you don't remember. So how, do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand y'all too completely. I mean,
Okay.
y'all being right down center of the line, ain't beating around no bush. I'm telling you right now, man, it's head just ain't letting me do nothing right now. Just driving. I ended up places I can't remember. I just remember getting chased. That's where I went with truck stops. God, I want to remember. Yeah, my head is full. It's split.
Sam, the sooner that you tell us, the sooner this is all over.
You got the theory. Help me out.
He's starting to close down. We needed to go in a different direction.
It ain't gonna get no better.
Sam's father contacted us and asked if he could speak to Sam. And we felt like we were at a point where maybe his dad had some insight or influence on Sam that would help us to locate the Russells.
Your dad was in here today, and he's got faith in you. When it comes to doing the right thing, he reassured Scott and I that you would do the right thing. Scott and I made a promise that we're going to keep to your father. He wants to see you and tell you he loves you. We're a man of our word. We're going to let that happen if you wanted to.
Yeah, this is down to my headache.
It's up to you, man.
Nobody just brought a gun and it just blew me away right here. Do everybody a world of favors.
I don't think that's going to happen. You tell me what you want to do.
Bring them in and get them.
Are you sure?
I ain't for sure about a lot of things right now.
We spoke to Sam's father before to let him know what we were trying to do. He was there to get Sam to tell us exactly what happened. But we were taking a gamble on Sam's father coming into the room and assisting us in the investigation.
Mr. Littleton, you can have a seat there. Okay.
It would be very easy for a family member just to let Sam know, hey, don't say another word, and I'll get an attorney for you. But we had decided that it would be a missed opportunity to get some more information out of him, so we may as well go ahead and do this.
Is it okay if I tell your dad what you've told us so far? Sam's told us that something bad happened to the elderly couple. He's not able to tell us what happened, but he knows that they were alive when he was first with them, right? And then Sam says not exactly the details about what happened with Tiffany, but is able to tell us that something bad happened there at the house. We don't know if he's intentionally not telling us, or whether, it's truly something that he's blocking out right now.
Sam, I love you. Boy, you was doing so good.
I know.
You done bought you a home. You done bought you a truck. You had your motorcycle.
I told everybody a long time ago that I wasn't right in the head. Ain't no excuse from far, Can't take back what I've done.
What'd you do? What have you done this time?
I don't know.
What made you do this?
I've always had these thoughts. Now, if I come to you and told you about these thoughts, what's the first thing you're going to think of? This psycho. And he's locked up.
No. If you'd have come to me, I'd took you to a doctor somewhere. Somehow, I'd have got you to a doctor. We'd have found out something about getting you some help. You need help.
What kind of help are you going to give somebody like that? Come on, Dad. Have you ever had a thought of that? I'm your own best bud. Have you ever had a thought like that in your mind? Then why would I? I'd be sitting at work grinding and wanting to hurt somebody. Why? That's not my nature. You didn't grow me up to be that way. I didn't mean to bring this all on you. I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know why. I don't know why.
I wish you'd have come to your daddy with it. Years ago, boy.
I'm just tired. I'm just tired.
You doing all right, Sam?
I don't mean to bring this on you, but this probably could be the last time I get to see you, so.
I know it.
And these guys probably went out of their way just to have you come in here, so. I don't mean to do the cussing and all that. I don't.
Sam, these two right here have been nice to me this morning. While you was out at the hospital, I come out here and they talked to me like I was a human being.
Same way, I'm a criminal, and these two guys sit down and talk to me like I was a man. And they treat me no different. They treated me with respect, and they have been ever since.
Having the father in the room there may have been a turning point. Sam was talking with us more freely. It seemed like he wanted to tell his dad, but he didn't know how to tell his dad. We just felt like he was going to tell if we pushed him at this point.
And like we said, the only way that we can end it real quick is for you to be able to tell us everything. You tell us one time, it's out there, it's done, and you don't tell anybody ever again. I mean, that's the quickest way.
Can you pinpoint where they got active? What highways was you on?
I thought it was 75, so I don't know, Dad. I mean, that's the only road I know. Is a straight shot. You know what I'm saying?
Tell us where those people are.
I mean, I want to. I just don't know. I'm just a bad person. I tried to tell you that the other day. I'm so sorry, man.
I know it. And I hope.
Absolutely.
Sam, are you okay with that? I love you. Pretty sore, Sam. Mommy, I would.
Having his dad in the room really helped the situation. Sam basically admits to his dad that he did it. He doesn't come out and say that, but he never tells his dad he didn't do it. That was big.
We make sure he's all right. He got bad back, bad legs.
We will make sure that he's okay.
Now we're at a point where he's already decided, my dad knows this bad thing has happened. He's just about ready now. If the opportunity is given to him, he's going to speak about committing the crimes.
Like I said, both of us have been up front with each other. You know that we know. You know that we believe that you're trying to help us, okay? So that's why we're working with you on it.
I'm going to be as direct as I can possibly be. Regarding Tiffany, how did you kill her? You know what happened. It's just way, way too hard to say it.
I just hope you can find in your heart to do the right thing here. Tell us what happened.
I think I strangled her.
Okay. Any other type of weapon that you used?
I think I might have stabbed her once or twice.
Now, where she was placed, that obviously was so she wouldn't be easily found. Is that a fair statement?
I can't remember where she was now. I know the basement.
Okay. And the Russells.
Did you strangle both of those two?
I mean, I'm strangled. I ain't for sure.
And then did you stab them afterwards too? Just like Tiffany?
I think I might have done Dick.
Can you tell us if it was after you left the house or whether it was still there at the house?
I think it was at the house.
After you had killed them, were they in the trunk? Or did you put them in any other part of the car?
He was the trunk.
We finally got his confession that he killed them. I think he was tired and he was ready to just admit to what he had done. At this point, the only thing we don't know is exactly where the Russells are located.
Sam, is there any way we can recover their bodies?
Railroad tracks and a cotton field.
Railroad tracks and a cotton field. Do you think one body is by the railroad tracks and one by the cotton field, or do you think?
Yeah. All I know is I didn't get on 75 very far.
All right, man.
Thanks, Sam.
Sam's information about the location of their bodies was vague, and he couldn't ever tell us what exit he'd gotten off, what road they were on. He would only say near a cotton field and near railroad tracks.
Outside of Chattanooga, Tennessee, local law enforcement were able to find the remains of Dick Russell. He was next to some railroad tracks covered in debris. We were doing a search on the area, but we couldn't locate Gladys. A week later, Gladys Russell was found in Georgia. He had laid Gladys in a cotton field a few hundred miles south of where Dick Russell had been located.
Without the confession, if Sam Littleton had decided to end the interview, the families would have just been devastated because they would have never have known what happened to them or got their bodies back for a proper burial.
We have mixed emotions. He never gave us the exact reason why things happened, why he decided to kill the Russells, and why he decided to kill Tiffany, and I'm sure it haunts her family to this day.
Hundreds of mourners came to the First Church of God for Tiffany Brown's funeral. They say they're consoling the family and helping them get through the burial of Tiffany Brown at the Bell Fountain Cemetery, just a few blocks away from the church.
The outpouring was just unreal. And even the police officers, friends of ours that we know, it almost seemed like they hurt as much as we did when we got to the funeral.
Sam Littleton's hands were shaking so bad that he could barely sign the plea agreement that keeps him alive but puts him in prison until he dies.
That brought a lot of great relief to the families. I know that there were some that wish for the death penalty, but in the end, justice was served.
Every day, I miss seeing her, and she's not here to see these boys grow up. And that bothers me. Her oldest is going to graduate next year, and she's not here to see that.
I miss her every day, every minute. You miss the communication that's gone. The text messages in the morning, kiss on the cheek, and love you, Dad. That's the hardest thing about it. It's gone. She is missed dearly every day.
The room smells like antiseptic and old breath, the kind of air that only exists where time is running out. Machines whisper. A monitor ticks like a nervous clock. Outside, Louisiana rain presses against the windows, slow and relentless, tapping out a rhythm that feels too deliberate to be random. A nurse stands near the door, arms crossed, eyes fixed on a man who has spent decades outrunning this moment. His chest rises. Falls. Each breath sounds borrowed. And then, in a voice thinned by years and regret, he says something no one has heard before. A name. A place. A night in 1975 that never let go. This is where the silence breaks. This is where a cold case begins to speak. 48 years earlier, Louisiana was louder. Summer cicadas screamed through the dark. Radios hummed with late-night talk shows and country songs soaked in heartbreak. Small towns breathed differently back then. Everybody knew everybody. Doors stayed unlocked. Trust was currency. And when that trust was shattered, it echoed longer than anyone expected. The victim was young, ordinary in the way that makes absence unbearable. A face known at the grocery store. A voice recognized over the phone. Someone who belonged to the background of daily life, until one night, they didn't come home. The report was filed with hesitation, then fear. By morning, worry had turned sharp. By nightfall, it was panic. The scene was discovered just off a narrow stretch of road, swallowed by trees and tall grass. Flashlights cut through the dark like knives. The air smelled of damp earth and gasoline. What they found there was quiet, too quiet. A body left without ceremony. No witnesses stepping forward. No screams reported. Just questions piling up faster than answers could be found. Newspapers moved quickly. Mysterious death. Shock in the community. Police search for clues. The words were bold, confident, hopeful. Behind them, investigators worked through the night, hands stained with mud and uncertainty. Evidence was scarce. Tire marks blurred by rain. Footprints trampled by responders and curious onlookers. A few items bagged. Logged. Stored away with care that assumed time would be an ally. It wasn't. Interviews began immediately. Friends. Coworkers. Neighbors. Everyone had a version of the victim. Everyone had theories. Some pointed fingers. Others offered alibis wrapped in nervous smiles. Detectives listened, nodded, took notes. They followed leads that went nowhere. They circled back, tried again. Days stretched into weeks. Weeks into months. The town changed its tone. Conversations lowered. Eyes lingered too long. Every unfamiliar car became suspicious. Parents pulled children closer. Locks clicked shut at night. The case lingered in the background, unresolved, unsettling, a reminder that violence had brushed too close to home and vanished without explanation. By the end of the year, the investigation slowed. Not from lack of care, but from lack of traction. The evidence refused to speak. Technology was limited. DNA was a future concept, whispered about in academic journals, not something that could save a case. What remained was paper. Photographs. Memories already beginning to blur. The cold case was officially classified, though no one used that phrase out loud. It felt like surrender. Files were boxed. Shelved. Promises were made quietly to the family. We won't forget. We'll keep looking. Words that sounded solid at the time, but grew heavier with each passing year. Life moved on, unevenly. New crimes replaced old headlines. New tragedies demanded attention. The victim's name appeared less frequently, then only on anniversaries, then mostly in private conversations, spoken carefully, like a fragile thing that might break if handled too roughly. Inside the police department, the case remained a ghost. Detectives who had worked it early on would pause when passing the file room. Some took it home mentally, replaying details late at night, wondering what they'd missed. Others avoided it entirely, unable to carry another unsolved weight. Years passed. Faces aged. Hair grayed. Some witnesses died. Others moved away. The town itself changed, but the road where the body was found stayed the same, bending through the trees, indifferent, keeping its secrets. Then came the late 1990s. DNA entered the conversation. Cold cases across the country began to stir. Old evidence was re-examined. Hopes were raised. In Louisiana, someone pulled the 1975 file from the shelf again. Boxes were opened. Items were inspected under new lights. But the material was degraded. Contaminated. Insufficient. The promise of science flickered, then dimmed. The case slipped back into dormancy. For the victim's family, time did not heal. It hardened. Holidays came and went with an empty space that never filled. Birthdays were marked with silence. Questions lingered unanswered, breeding frustration, anger, exhaustion. They learned to live alongside uncertainty, but never inside it comfortably. Every few years, a rumor surfaced. Someone had heard something. Someone knew someone who knew the truth. Each whisper reignited hope, then collapsed under scrutiny. The cold case remained exactly that, cold, inert, preserved in unresolved grief. And then, decades later, a phone call came from an unexpected place. A hospital. A nurse. A man requesting to speak with law enforcement. His condition was deteriorating rapidly. There was urgency in the request, the kind that didn't ask politely. Detectives were skeptical. Deathbed confessions were unpredictable. Sometimes truthful. Sometimes desperate attempts to control a final narrative. Still, they went. The man was not a stranger to them, though he had never been a suspect. A familiar name. A familiar face. Someone who had lived quietly. Someone who had aged without incident. He had raised a family. Held jobs. Paid taxes. Blended seamlessly into the background of normal life. And now, he was running out of time. At first, he spoke slowly, circling the truth like it might flee if approached too directly. He talked about regret. About guilt that followed him into sleep. About dreams that returned night after night, unchanged by the years. The detectives listened without interrupting, trained to let silence do the work. Then he said it. He described the night in 1975 with clarity that cut through the room. The location. The argument. The moment control was lost. Details that were never public. Details that matched the evidence locked away for nearly half a century. The words landed heavily, each one settling into place with terrible precision. The cold case file, dormant for decades, cracked open in that hospital room. Detectives exchanged glances. Notes were taken. Questions asked carefully, deliberately. They were not chasing a confession. They were verifying one. And the more the man spoke, the more the past aligned with the present. Outside, rain continued to fall. Inside, history rewrote itself. The confession did not bring relief. It brought gravity. Because a solved cold case does not erase loss. It reframes it. It confirms what was feared. It gives shape to the monster that once hid in abstraction. When the man's voice faded and the machines filled the space again, detectives left with more than statements. They carried the weight of finality. Of knowing that justice, long delayed, was finally within reach, even if it arrived too late to feel victorious. News broke quietly at first. Then louder. Headlines resurfaced the victim's name. 1975 cold case revisited. Deathbed confession shocks investigators. The town reacted with a mix of disbelief and grim acknowledgement. The truth had been close all along, living among them, aging beside them. For the family, the call came with trembling hands. Answers were delivered gently, as if volume could soften impact. Tears followed, but not the kind that cleanse. These were heavy, complicated tears, soaked in decades of unanswered questions. The cold case was no longer cold. It was burning again, illuminating shadows that had grown long and comfortable in the dark. And this was only the beginning of what the truth would demand. The confession did not travel alone. It carried consequences, rippling outward from that hospital room like a shockwave moving through time. When detectives returned to the station, the old file was no longer an artifact. It was alive again. Boxes were reopened with hands that trembled slightly, not from age, but from recognition. Notes written in fading ink suddenly felt current. Photographs once dismissed as inconclusive now looked accusatory, as if they had been waiting for this moment to be understood. The name spoken on the deathbed echoed through the building. It landed on desks. In hallways. In quiet offices where retired officers' photos lined the walls. Some of those faces had chased this case decades earlier. Some were gone now. Others were still alive, still listening, still carrying unfinished business. The cold case had found its voice, but it demanded verification. Confessions are not endings. They are beginnings disguised as closure. Detectives moved carefully. They replayed the recorded statement, line by line, pausing often. Every detail was weighed against what had been known in 1975. The road description matched. The weather aligned. The timing fit too cleanly to be coincidence. But law enforcement does not operate on belief. It operates on corroboration. And so the work intensified. They drove the route described by the man, tracing curves that had not changed in nearly 50 years. Trees had grown taller. Asphalt had been repaved. But the bones of the landscape remained the same. Standing there, some officers felt a chill that had nothing to do with the breeze. This was where the truth had been buried in plain sight. Evidence storage was searched again, deeper this time. Items once logged as insignificant were re-examined. A fragment. A stain. A fiber preserved more out of protocol than optimism. Forensic labs, now armed with technology unimaginable in 1975, were contacted. The past was being pulled forward, dragged into the present under harsh fluorescent lights. Meanwhile, word spread through the department. Conversations shifted. This was no longer hypothetical. The man who confessed was still alive, but not for long. Time was tightening its grip. Warrants were prepared. Legal teams consulted. The clock mattered now more than ever. Outside the station, the community began to stir. News outlets caught wind of the development. Reporters made calls. Old headlines resurfaced. The victim's name re-entered public conversation with a force that startled even those who had never forgotten. Social media, absent in 1975, amplified the shock. People asked the same questions their parents had once whispered. How could this happen here? How could it take so long? The suspect's family learned through fractured channels. A phone call. A message. A knock at the door. They struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the story unfolding across screens and papers. To them, he had been reliable. Predictable. A presence that felt safe. The revelation fractured that certainty, splitting memory from reality. Detectives returned to the hospital, this time with documentation. The man's condition had worsened. His voice was weaker. But his clarity remained. He repeated his account, this time with less hesitation. There was no attempt to retract. No bargaining. Just a grim insistence on finishing what he had begun. He spoke of fear. Of how he had lived with it quietly, constantly. Of how every knock on the door had sent his heart racing. Of how every news story about cold cases reopening had made his stomach turn. He described the weight of knowing he had stolen a life and borrowed time ever since. The detectives did not respond emotionally. They did not reassure. They documented. They asked follow-up questions that cut deep, questions designed not to comfort but to confirm. The answers held steady. The truth did not shift under pressure. That, more than anything, unsettled them. Legal steps accelerated. Prosecutors were briefed. They listened intently, aware that deathbed confessions carry unique challenges. A confession without trial can feel incomplete. But when supported by corroborating evidence, it becomes powerful. The case, once fragile, was solidifying rapidly. Back in the community, reactions fractured along invisible lines. Some expressed relief. Others expressed rage. Many expressed disbelief that the truth had lived among them for so long, unnoticed. Conversations replayed past interactions with the suspect, searching for missed signs, hidden cracks. Every memory became suspect. The victim's family existed in a strange in-between. Answers had arrived, but peace had not followed. Instead, the confession reopened wounds long scarred over. They revisited photographs. Letters. Moments frozen in time. Grief resurfaced, sharper now because it was no longer abstract. It had a face. A voice. A confession. They were asked how they felt. The question felt insufficient. How do you feel when a mystery ends but loss remains unchanged? When justice approaches decades late, carrying neither apology nor repair? They struggled to articulate emotions that did not fit into neat categories. The cold case task force expanded. Younger investigators were brought in, their perspectives shaped by modern training, their tools more advanced. They worked alongside veterans who remembered the original investigation, creating a bridge between eras. This collaboration became essential. The past and present had to agree. Every document was retyped. Every timeline reconstructed. The confession was placed within a framework of evidence that now felt inevitable. What once looked like a series of dead ends now resembled a path obscured by time, not absence. The suspect's health declined rapidly. Doctors spoke in hushed tones. Prognosis shortened. The urgency intensified. Prosecutors made a decision. Charges would be filed. Not for spectacle. Not for revenge. But for record. For acknowledgement. For the official recognition that a crime had occurred and that responsibility had been assigned. When the arrest warrant was issued, it felt surreal. A man confined to a hospital bed, guarded not for escape but for accountability. Cameras were kept away. There was no dramatic perp walk. Just paperwork, signatures, a quiet confirmation that the system had finally caught up. The headline broke the following morning. Louisiana 1975 cold case solved. The words were stark. Unembellished. They carried weight precisely because of their restraint. Decades of mystery condensed into a single sentence. Across the state, reactions poured in. Retired officers called former colleagues. Journalists revisited archives. True crime enthusiasts dissected timelines. But beneath the noise, something more subtle occurred. A collective reckoning. A realization that time does not erase truth. It only delays its arrival. Inside the station, detectives paused. There was no celebration. No cheers. Just a moment of stillness. They understood something the headlines could not convey. Solving a cold case is not about victory. It is about obligation fulfilled, however late. The victim's name was spoken again, this time without a question mark. Not as an unsolved puzzle. But as a person whose story had been forcibly interrupted and finally, formally, acknowledged. That mattered. As night fell, Louisiana humidity wrapped the town in familiar heaviness. The rain returned, steady and unhurried. Somewhere, machines continued to hum in a hospital room. Somewhere else, a family sat together, absorbing a truth that had taken nearly 50 years to arrive. The cold case had broken its silence. But what followed would test whether truth alone was enough to quiet the echoes it left behind. The days that followed blurred into a strange rhythm, equal parts urgency and restraint. The confession had cracked the case open, but it had not yet sealed it shut. In Louisiana, truth rarely arrives cleanly. It comes layered, humid, clinging to everything it touches. Detectives moved through this phase with caution, aware that history was watching now, that every step would be scrutinized through the lens of decades lost. The suspect remained under guard in the hospital, his body weakening even as the case against him grew stronger. Nurses came and went. Machines continued their soft, mechanical breathing. Outside the room, law enforcement coordinated quietly, careful not to turn the final chapter into a spectacle. This was not about headlines. It was about permanence. About ensuring that what had finally surfaced could never be pushed back into the dark. Prosecutors assembled the narrative piece by piece, aligning the confession with physical remnants pulled from storage. Evidence that once felt inert now carried momentum. A timeline reconstructed from weather reports, pay stubs, and witness statements formed a spine that held steady under pressure. Each detail mattered. Each confirmation closed another gap the years had widened. They revisited old interview transcripts, reading them with fresh eyes. Phrases that once seemed harmless now carried weight. A pause here. A contradiction there. The suspect's name appeared casually in early notes, never circled, never underlined. Just present. Ordinary. The realization settled heavily. The truth had brushed past investigators before, unnoticed, camouflaged by familiarity. Some detectives struggled with that. Not guilt exactly, but something adjacent. A recognition that cases are not always unsolved because clues are absent, but because context blinds as much as it reveals. In 1975, the town trusted its own. That trust had been a shield. And now it felt like an accomplice. The victim's family was brought in again, this time not for questions, but for confirmation. Detectives explained the evidence carefully, aware that certainty can wound as deeply as doubt. They spoke of the confession, of the corroboration, of the steps being taken to ensure the case would stand even if the suspect never left the hospital bed. There were tears. There was silence. There was anger that arrived late and stayed longer than expected. The family listened, absorbing details they had waited a lifetime to hear, only to discover that knowing did not soothe. It sharpened everything. The night in 1975 became vivid again, no longer abstract, but precise. Too precise. The community reacted in waves. Churches mentioned the case in prayer. Bars buzzed with speculation. Old-timers shook their heads, replaying memories, searching for signs they might have missed. Younger residents encountered the story as revelation, shocked that something so dark had lived beneath the surface of their hometown's history. Some expressed relief. Others expressed betrayal. The suspect had attended events, waved from porches, stood in line at the same stores as everyone else. Normalcy, it turned out, had been a disguise worn convincingly for decades. As media interest intensified, officials chose their words carefully. They avoided sensational language. They emphasized process. The phrase, "cold case solved," appeared again and again, but those closest to the investigation understood how misleading that phrase could be. Solved did not mean finished. It meant exposed. The suspect requested to speak again. This time, not to confess, but to explain. Detectives agreed, recording every word. His voice wavered, but his narrative remained intact. He spoke of that night as if it existed in a sealed chamber inside him, untouched by time. He described panic. A moment that spiraled. A decision made too quickly and regretted too slowly. He did not ask for forgiveness. He spoke instead of inevitability. Of knowing, even in 1975, that this would someday return. That the silence had always felt temporary. That every year he lived freely felt borrowed, counterfeit. There was something unsettling about the calm with which he spoke. Not coldness. Resignation. As if he had rehearsed this reckoning internally for decades, waiting for the moment his body would force his hand. Prosecutors prepared statements. Legal teams debated logistics. Could a trial proceed if the suspect died before arraignment? How would justice be framed if sentencing never occurred? These questions hovered, uncomfortable but necessary. The law had to anticipate outcomes that no one preferred to imagine. Meanwhile, forensic results came back one by one. Not dramatic revelations, but confirmations. Fibers consistent. Locations aligned. The kind of evidence that does not scream, but nods. Each nod reinforced the confession's credibility, building a case that felt grimly complete. Detectives who had been children in 1975 now worked alongside those who had chased leads back then. The generational overlap was striking. One investigator spoke quietly about how his father had followed the case early in his career, how it had shaped his understanding of unresolved violence. Now, he was here, finishing what another generation had begun. This continuity mattered. It transformed the cold case from a relic into a responsibility carried forward, not abandoned. The town's reaction evolved as days passed. Initial shock gave way to reflection. People spoke openly now, sharing memories they had once suppressed. Stories surfaced. Small moments that felt odd in hindsight. Nothing definitive, nothing actionable, but enough to unsettle the collective narrative of innocence. The victim's name appeared more frequently, spoken with a reverence that had been missing when uncertainty dominated. Memorials were revisited. Flowers appeared. Candles burned briefly, then went out, leaving behind melted wax and questions about what remembrance means when truth arrives late. Inside the hospital, time accelerated. Doctors updated law enforcement daily. The suspect slept more. Ate less. His body was closing chapters on its own schedule, indifferent to legal timelines. The possibility loomed that justice would be recorded only on paper, never performed in a courtroom. This reality created tension. Some felt cheated by it. Others felt it was fitting, a quiet ending for a crime committed in silence. There was no consensus. Only acceptance that resolution does not always arrive in the form we expect. As the case approached its legal threshold, officials prepared a public statement. They acknowledged the confession. They outlined the evidence. They named the crime plainly. No euphemisms. No softening. The truth, delivered without flourish. When the statement was released, the response was immediate. National outlets picked it up. True crime forums dissected it. Analysts debated the psychology of delayed confession. But beneath the commentary, something fundamental shifted. The story was no longer about mystery. It was about reckoning. For the victim's family, this shift was profound. Mystery had been a constant companion, cruel but familiar. Reckoning was new. Unstable. It demanded emotional recalibration. They found themselves grieving not just the loss, but the years spent waiting for clarity that now felt insufficient. The cold case, once defined by absence, was now defined by presence. By a name. A voice. A confession etched into record. It no longer drifted. It anchored. And yet, even as answers solidified, the haunting quality of the case remained. Because some questions do not disappear when solved. They deepen. They ask not what happened, but how it was allowed to fade. How a town, a system, a generation lived alongside an unresolved truth for so long. As night settled again over Louisiana, the air thick and unmoving, the case pressed forward toward its inevitable conclusion. But the echoes of 1975 lingered, refusing to be silenced completely. The cold case had spoken. Now it demanded to be understood. By the time the fourth phase unfolded, the case had shifted from revelation to reckoning, from discovery to deliberation. The confession had steadied into fact, but facts, once found, demand structure. They insist on order. In Louisiana, the machinery of justice turned slowly, but it turned with intent, grinding years into procedure, memory into motion. Inside the prosecutor's office, walls were lined with timelines. Yellow notes clung to corkboards like insects pinned in place. Dates from 1975 were written in thick marker, circled, underlined, connected by red string to hospital reports, lab results, witness statements recovered from boxes that smelled of dust and neglect. This was not a story being told. It was a case being assembled, stripped of flourish, bound by sequence. Every sentence of the confession was tested. Not for truth alone, but for durability. Could it withstand cross-examination? Could it survive without the speaker present? The suspect's health was failing faster than anticipated. His breaths grew shallow. His eyes closed for longer stretches. Time, once his shield, had become his adversary. Detectives returned to the original scene again, this time not as searchers, but as translators of the past. They stood where the body had been found, measuring distances with modern instruments, overlaying old photographs onto current terrain. The trees had thickened. The ground had shifted. But the geometry remained faithful. The confession had described a turn, a pause, a placement that matched the land's memory. It was unsettling how cooperative the earth could be after all these years. Neighbors who had once been interviewed casually were contacted again. Many were elderly now. Some had forgotten entirely. Others remembered too much. Their recollections came haltingly, stitched together with long pauses and sideways glances, as if memory itself feared being overheard. A few mentioned seeing the suspect's vehicle that night, though they had not thought it unusual at the time. Familiarity had dulled suspicion. It always does. The cold case revealed itself not as a failure of effort, but as a failure of imagination. In 1975, no one wanted to believe that violence could emerge from within. Outsiders were easier to suspect. Drifters. Transients. Anyone but someone known. Anyone but someone ordinary. This realization weighed heavily on the investigators who now carried the case. They understood that cold cases often survive not because clues are hidden, but because conclusions are resisted. The truth, when it threatens the social fabric, is often left untouched, preserved by denial rather than distance. As legal preparations advanced, the question of public accountability grew louder. Should the suspect be arraigned publicly, even from a hospital bed? Would that serve justice or spectacle? Prosecutors debated fiercely. The family's wishes were considered. The community's expectations loomed. In the end, the decision leaned toward transparency. The truth had been hidden too long. It would not be unveiled quietly. Arrangements were made. A judge was briefed. Court officers coordinated with medical staff. The setting would be controlled. Dignified. There would be no theatrics. Only record. The victim's family was informed of the plan. Their reactions varied. Some wanted to see the man face consequence, regardless of his condition. Others hesitated, unsure whether witnessing his frailty would bring peace or deepen anger. There was no consensus, only the shared understanding that this moment, however it unfolded, could not be undone. Media attention intensified as the arraignment date approached. Vans lined streets. Cameras waited. Analysts speculated. The phrase "deathbed confession" dominated headlines, pulling readers in with its promise of finality. But those closest to the case knew better. Finality is rarely clean. Inside the hospital room, the suspect was informed of the charges. He listened without interruption. His expression did not change. When asked if he understood, he nodded slowly. This acknowledgement, simple as it was, carried more weight than any denial could have. It marked the shift from private admission to public responsibility. On the morning of the arraignment, rain returned, heavy and unrelenting. The sky hung low, pressing down on the city as if to remind it of gravity. Inside the courtroom, seating was limited. Family members sat together, hands clasped, eyes forward. Detectives took positions along the walls. Reporters whispered. The air was taut, expectant. The suspect was wheeled in quietly, flanked by officers who had spent months preparing for this moment. He looked smaller than his photograph suggested. Time had reduced him to essentials. But the presence of authority, of record, restored a measure of scale. This was not a dying man. This was a defendant. The charges were read aloud. The words echoed, formal and unforgiving. Each syllable tethered the present to 1975, bridging decades with legal precision. The suspect's name was spoken in full. The victim's name followed. For the first time in nearly half a century, they were linked officially, indelibly. There was no plea entered. The process paused, suspended by medical reality. The court acknowledged the likelihood that proceedings would not continue as usual. Still, the act of charging mattered. It transformed the confession from narrative into judgment. Outside the courtroom, reactions fractured. Some expressed relief that the system had finally spoken. Others questioned the value of charges without trial. The debate was loud, emotional, unresolved. But beneath it, something quieter took root. Recognition. The acknowledgement that the truth had been named publicly, regardless of what followed. For the victim's family, the arraignment was both devastating and validating. Seeing the man who had haunted their lives for decades, reduced and exposed, did not erase pain. But it replaced speculation with certainty. That mattered more than they expected. As the suspect was returned to the hospital, his condition worsened. Doctors spoke in careful tones. Hours became uncertain. The possibility that he would die before any further proceedings loomed, heavy and unavoidable. Prosecutors prepared statements in anticipation. The system braced for an ending that would feel incomplete no matter how it arrived. The town responded in its own way. Conversations quieted. There was less anger now, more reflection. People revisited old assumptions. They questioned the comfort of familiarity. The cold case had not just identified a perpetrator. It had exposed a vulnerability, the ease with which trust can become blindness. Church bells rang that Sunday with unusual solemnity. Sermons spoke of accountability, of truth emerging late but still necessary. In small kitchens and living rooms, families discussed the case with a seriousness reserved for shared reckoning. The story had become a mirror. Inside the hospital room, the suspect drifted in and out of consciousness. When awake, he asked few questions. When asleep, his face tightened, as if wrestling with something unseen. Officers remained nearby, their presence less about containment than witness. They understood the symbolism of this vigil. History was closing a loop, and it demanded attendance. As night fell again, Louisiana settled into its familiar hush. The rain slowed. The air thickened. Somewhere between the past and the present, the case hovered, balanced on the edge of conclusion. Not yet resolved. Not yet silent. Part 4 ended not with closure, but with convergence. The law, the truth, the community, and the years all pressing inward, shaping an ending that no one could control, only endure. By the time the fifth movement began, the case no longer belonged to the past. It occupied the present with weight and heat, pressing against every conversation, every quiet moment, every breath drawn inside the hospital room where the suspect lingered between waking and absence. The machinery of justice had done what it could. Now time reclaimed the lead. Doctors spoke in low voices outside the room, their words precise and careful, calibrated not to promise or predict. Organ failure. Complications. Hours, perhaps days. The suspect's body had become an unreliable witness, fading even as the record grew stronger. Officers remained posted, not because escape was possible, but because presence mattered. This was custody by conscience as much as by law. The victim's family waited without ceremony. There were no banners, no chants, no demands shouted into microphones. Only a shared stillness, punctured occasionally by the buzz of a phone or the creak of a chair. They had waited decades already. Waiting had become a language they spoke fluently, even when it hurt. Across town, prosecutors prepared for outcomes that would never feel like victories. If the suspect died before further proceedings, the charges would stand but the trial would vanish into the realm of what-ifs. There would be no cross-examination, no verdict read aloud, no sentence imposed. The law would have spoken, but not finished its sentence. This was the compromise time demanded. Reporters filled airtime with speculation, but the tone had shifted. Gone was the thrill of discovery. In its place sat a more subdued gravity. Commentators spoke about accountability without punishment, about truth without consequence, about whether justice could exist in fragments. No one had easy answers. The case resisted simplification. Inside the hospital room, the suspect awoke briefly near dawn. His eyes opened with effort, focusing slowly on the ceiling, then on the figures nearby. An officer asked if he needed anything. Water. Pain relief. A pause. Then, unexpectedly, he spoke again, his voice thin but deliberate. He asked whether the family had been told everything. The question landed heavily. The officer did not answer directly. He reminded the suspect that his statements were already on record, that they had been shared with prosecutors, that the family had been informed of the confession and the charges. The suspect nodded, absorbing this. His gaze drifted toward the window, where a slice of gray morning pressed against the glass. He whispered something then, barely audible. The officer leaned closer. The words were not new facts, not details that would alter timelines or evidence. They were something else. An acknowledgement of harm. An admission of fear. A sentence that did not excuse or explain, only confirmed that the weight he had carried was real. It was not recorded. It was not transcribed. It existed only in that moment, between two breaths, and then it was gone. The officer documented the exchange nonetheless, noting the time, the context, the condition. Even fleeting truths deserved documentation. Especially those that arrived too late to matter legally, but too clearly to ignore humanly. As the day progressed, the suspect's condition deteriorated rapidly. Alarms sounded. Nurses moved with practiced urgency. Family members of the suspect were notified, arriving quietly, eyes hollow, faces strained by a complicated grief that had no script. They avoided the officer's gaze. No one spoke beyond necessity. When the end came, it did not announce itself. There was no dramatic last word, no sudden clarity. Just a slowing. A final exhale. A stillness that settled like dust. The time of death was noted. The room emptied. Custody ended, not by release, but by inevitability. News of the death spread quickly. Headlines broke the story with restrained language, careful not to tip into spectacle. Suspect dies before trial. Cold case confession followed by death. The words were factual, but the implications rippled outward, touching everyone who had followed the case with hope for a different ending. The district attorney held a press conference later that afternoon. Standing behind a podium, he spoke plainly. The charges would remain on record. The confession had been corroborated by evidence. The case, while legally unresolved in the absence of trial, was considered cleared. The term felt insufficient, but it was the only one available. He emphasized that the victim's name would remain attached to the truth, not buried beneath procedural gaps. He acknowledged the pain of an ending without judgment. He reminded the public that justice, while incomplete, had not been absent. Questions followed. Was this closure? Was it justice? Could a confession without conviction truly settle a cold case? The prosecutor did not pretend certainty. He spoke of accountability taking many forms, of truth being one of them, of the importance of naming harm even when punishment is no longer possible. The victim's family released a brief statement. They thanked investigators for their persistence. They acknowledged the complexity of their emotions. Relief. Anger. Sadness. An exhaustion that went bone deep. They asked for privacy. They did not declare forgiveness or closure. They did not need to. Their restraint said enough. In the days that followed, the town exhaled. Slowly. Unevenly. Conversations resumed, but they carried a new undertone. People revisited old memories, connecting dots they had never dared to align. Familiar faces were re-examined. Assumptions were questioned. The cold case had altered the town's self-image, exposing how proximity can blur judgment. Detectives closed files that had been open for decades. They archived evidence with care, labeling boxes not just with dates and case numbers, but with notes reflecting the resolution. Cleared by confession. Charges filed. Suspect deceased. The language was clinical, but the hands that sealed those boxes were not. Some lingered longer than necessary, touching folders, rereading notes, reluctant to let go. For younger officers, the case became a lesson taught quietly, without lecture. It demonstrated the value of persistence, the importance of preserving evidence, the danger of certainty without proof. It showed how technology could resurrect truth, but also how timing could deny its full expression. For veterans, it was something else entirely. A reckoning. A reminder that every unsolved case waits patiently, that time does not erase guilt, only delays its arrival. They carried that knowledge forward, heavier now, but clearer. At the site where the body had been found in 1975, a small memorial appeared one evening. No announcement preceded it. No permission was requested. Just flowers, a photograph, a name written carefully on a card. The earth received it without protest. Wind moved through the trees. Traffic passed nearby, unaware. Someone had added a note beneath the photograph. It did not speak of justice or revenge. It read simply, "You were not forgotten." That sentence traveled far. In court records, the case would always bear an asterisk. No verdict. No sentence. But in the collective memory, the narrative had shifted. The unknown had been replaced by the known. Silence had been broken. The cold case, while never truly warm, had thawed enough to reveal its shape. As weeks turned into months, attention drifted elsewhere. New stories replaced old ones. The cycle continued. But for those touched directly by the case, its presence lingered, quieter now, less jagged, but still real. Grief does not vanish. It adapts. Part 5 ended not with resolution, but with reckoning. A truth spoken too late to punish, yet too powerful to dismiss. A case closed by death, but opened by understanding. The silence had ended, but the echo remained, stretching forward, reminding all who heard it that time does not absolve, it only waits. In the aftermath of the suspect's death, the town discovered that silence does not end when a voice disappears. It changes texture. It settles into walls, into routines, into the pauses between sentences when people realize the story is no longer unfolding but still unfinished. The cold case had been declared cleared, yet nothing felt complete. Instead, a different phase began, one that unfolded not in courtrooms or hospital rooms, but in living rooms, archives, and memory itself. The evidence room became the quiet center of gravity. Boxes long sealed were reopened one final time, not for prosecution, but for confirmation. Every item was re-examined with the careful reverence usually reserved for relics. The fibers. The degraded photographs. The handwritten notes made by detectives who had since retired or died. Nothing new was expected to emerge. That was not the point. The point was to ensure that what had been said, what had been confessed, truly aligned with what had been preserved. Forensic analysts worked methodically, cross-referencing the confession with physical facts. Locations matched. Timelines held. Small details, the position of the body, the route taken away from the scene, the improvised weapon described, all corresponded with records created decades earlier. The case did not unravel under scrutiny. It tightened. The truth, once fragile, proved stubbornly consistent. A final report was compiled, thick and unambiguous. It did not dramatize. It did not editorialize. It simply stated that the confession was credible, corroborated, and complete. That document would become the official endpoint, the last word the system could offer. It was signed, filed, and archived. The case number was marked inactive. Outside institutional spaces, reactions were less orderly. Neighbors of the suspect revisited every interaction they had ever had with him. The way he waved. The way he avoided eye contact. The years he lived quietly, unremarkable, unchallenged. Some felt guilt for not suspecting. Others felt anger at the implication that they should have known. Most felt a dull confusion, realizing how little anyone truly knows about the people beside them. The suspect's family retreated from view. Their grief was layered and private, complicated by a truth that arrived too late to confront directly. They did not issue statements. They did not attend memorials. They bore a loss that could not be publicly mourned without explanation, and an explanation that could not be publicly shared without judgment. They lived in that tension, day after day. The victim's family, meanwhile, faced a different reckoning. For decades, their lives had been shaped by absence, birthdays marked by silence, holidays punctured by memory, milestones reached without celebration. Now, the absence had a name, a cause, a narrative. That knowledge did not erase pain. It reframed it. Some found a measure of peace in knowing. Others found new anger, directed not just at the perpetrator, but at time itself. They were invited to review the final case file. Not obligated. Invited. The choice mattered. Some declined, unwilling to reopen wounds. Others accepted, needing to see the words, the confirmations, the proof that their loved one's story had not been imagined or minimized. Those who read it did so slowly, often stopping, often crying, often rereading the same lines until they felt real. Community leaders organized a small remembrance ceremony weeks later. No press conference. No speeches by officials. Just a gathering at a neutral space, a park, a library hall, where those who wished could come and acknowledge what had happened. Candles were lit. Names were spoken. Silence was shared. It was not closure. It was recognition. The case began to appear in academic discussions, cited as an example of late-stage resolution. Criminology students studied it not for its drama, but for its lessons. The preservation of evidence. The ethics of posthumous accountability. The psychological impact on communities when justice arrives without judgment. Professors spoke carefully, emphasizing that such cases resist clean conclusions. Detectives involved in the reopening gave interviews months later, their voices steadier now. They spoke about patience, about frustration, about the strange intimacy of working a case where the victim and the suspect both age beyond reach. They admitted doubts they had once suppressed. They described moments when the case felt cursed, destined never to speak. And they described the shock when it finally did. One detective, nearing retirement, spoke of the moment he read the confession alone at his desk. He did not feel triumph. He felt relief, followed immediately by sadness. Not just for the victim, but for the years lost to silence. He said the case taught him that justice is not a finish line. It is a direction. Public interest faded, as it always does. New headlines displaced old ones. But the cold case left a residue. People became more attentive to unsolved stories. Tips were called in. Old rumors resurfaced in other towns. Evidence was re-examined elsewhere. The ripple effect spread quietly, without attribution. In private moments, members of the victim's family noticed subtle changes in themselves. Sleep came easier some nights. Dreams shifted. The endless question, who did this, no longer haunted every thought. In its place stood another question, what now? It was unfamiliar, almost disorienting. Grief had shaped their identities for so long that its transformation felt like loss all over again. They began to talk about the victim differently. Not as a symbol of injustice, but as a person again. Stories surfaced that had been buried beneath pain. Laughter returned, tentative at first. The cold case, once a defining feature of their lives, loosened its grip slightly. Not gone. Never gone. But changed. The legal system moved on, but the record remained. Future background checks would flag the suspect's name, now permanently associated with the crime. History would remember him not as a neighbor, not as a relative, but as the man who confessed too late. That was the consequence time could still impose. At the site of the original crime, nature continued its indifferent work. Grass grew. Weather-eroded traces long vanished. But people still visited, sometimes without knowing why they were drawn there. The place held a charge, a quiet gravity. It reminded them that violence leaves marks beyond the visible, and that some places remember even when people forget. Part 6 did not deliver resolution. It documented aftermath. The long echo that follows truth when it arrives after punishment is no longer possible. It traced how a cold case, once solved, continues to live, not in headlines, but in habits, in conversations, in the altered understanding of a community that learned too late what had been hiding in plain sight. The silence had been broken. But what replaced it was not noise. It was a deeper, heavier quiet, one that asked listeners to sit with it, to learn from it, and to carry forward the knowledge that even when justice arrives late, it still matters that it arrives at all. Years after the confession, after the paperwork was finalized and the case officially stamped closed, the story refused to stay still. It lingered, not as a headline anymore, but as a presence woven into the town's identity, a quiet undercurrent that surfaced whenever someone paused too long at a stoplight, or stared out across the river at dusk, or heard a familiar last name spoken in a new context. The cold case was solved, yes, but solved did not mean erased. It meant transformed. In schools, teachers noticed students asking different questions during local history lessons. They wanted to know how something so violent could happen in a place that looked so ordinary in old photographs. They wanted to know how an entire community could walk past a truth for decades without seeing it. The answers were never simple. Educators spoke about the limits of knowledge, about how evil rarely announces itself, about how time can blur suspicion into routine. The case became a lesson not just in crime, but in human perception. Local journalists, years removed from the initial frenzy, began revisiting their own archives. They reread articles they had written in the 80s and 90s, noticing the language they once used. Words like alleged, mysterious, no suspects. They saw how carefully they had avoided speculation, how often they had relied on official statements, how rarely they had challenged the absence of progress. Some felt pride in their restraint. Others felt regret. The cold case forced them to reckon with the role of silence in public storytelling. At the police department, younger officers studied the case file during training rotations. It was no longer an active investigation, but it was required reading. Instructors emphasized the importance of preserving evidence, of documenting even the smallest inconsistencies, of never assuming a case is truly dead. They spoke about how technology changes, how witnesses age, how confessions can come from unexpected places at unexpected times. The case became a cautionary tale and a source of motivation, equal parts warning and hope. The victim's name, once spoken only in hushed tones, began appearing again in public spaces. A scholarship fund was established in their honor, modest but meaningful, aimed at supporting students interested in criminal justice or forensic science. The family did not frame it as revenge or justice. They framed it as continuity. A way for something good to move forward from something broken. Each year, when the recipient was announced, the room grew quiet, heavy with unspoken acknowledgement. For the family, grief evolved in unpredictable ways. There were days when the solved cold case felt like a gift, a release from decades of uncertainty. There were other days when it felt like a cruel reminder of everything that could not be changed. The confession had answered the central question, but it had also closed the door on confrontation, on accountability in the traditional sense. There would be no trial. No verdict read aloud. No moment when the person responsible had to face them and hear the impact of his actions. Instead, they carried a truth that had arrived too late to be used as a weapon, only as a weight. Therapy sessions became spaces where they learned to talk about anger that had nowhere to go. Counselors spoke about ambiguous loss, about delayed closure, about the strange grief that follows resolution without consequence. The family listened, nodded, tried to integrate those words into lives already shaped by absence. In the wider community, rumors finally lost their power. For years, suspicion had drifted from house to house, name to name, never settling, always poisoning relationships just enough to matter. Once the truth emerged, those whispers evaporated, replaced by a clearer, harsher reality. Some people felt relief. Others felt shame for the private accusations they had carried for decades. The solved cold case forced an unspoken reckoning with the damage caused by uncertainty itself. The suspect's former home became a point of fixation for a time. People drove past it slowly. Some took photos. Others avoided the street entirely. Eventually, a new family moved in, unaware at first of the history attached to the walls. When they learned, they faced a choice: leave, or stay and reclaim the space. They chose to stay. Over time, curtains changed, paint colors shifted, laughter returned. The house did not forget, but it no longer dominated conversation. Life, stubborn and indifferent, continued. Scholars studying criminal psychology referenced the case when discussing delayed confessions. They analyzed possible motivations: guilt, fear of death, the desire for control even in final moments. They debated whether the confession was an act of conscience or a final assertion of power. There was no consensus. The man was dead. His inner world was inaccessible. The cold case offered answers, but not explanations. Anniversaries became complicated. The date of the crime, once marked only by grief, now carried a second layer: resolution. Some family members chose to observe it privately. Others ignored it entirely. The community, uncertain how to respond, gradually stopped organizing public remembrances. Not out of disrespect, but out of recognition that grief does not follow schedules, and that closure, when it comes, does not arrive all at once. Occasionally, new information surfaced, not about the crime itself, but about the context. Someone would recall seeing the suspect near the area years earlier. Another would remember a strange comment made at a party long forgotten. These recollections no longer changed the outcome, but they altered perception. People realized how many moments they had dismissed, how many details they had failed to connect. It was unsettling, a reminder of how hindsight sharpens memory into accusation. The cold case also influenced how the town responded to new crimes. Reports were taken more seriously. Missing persons alerts spread faster. Community watch groups formed not out of paranoia, but out of a shared determination not to let silence stretch for decades again. The solved case became a reference point, a quiet standard against which future responses were measured. For the detectives who had worked the case in its final years, retirement brought reflection. Some kept copies of the closing report in personal files, not out of pride, but as a reminder of why persistence matters. They spoke about the emotional toll of reopening old wounds, of contacting families long resigned to uncertainty. They admitted that there were moments they considered letting the past stay buried. And they acknowledged, with humility, that the outcome had depended as much on chance as on skill. Public interest documentaries eventually followed, produced years after the fact. They used dramatic music, slow-motion shots, and careful narration. The family watched one, turned it off halfway through, and never finished it. They did not need dramatization. They lived the story. For them, the cold case was not content. It was memory. And still, the case continued to echo. In late-night conversations. In quiet thoughts before sleep. In the way people understood the word solved. Because solved did not mean healed. It meant clarified. It meant that the unknown had been replaced by something knowable, something concrete, even if that something was painful. Part 7 exists in that space after revelation, where the shock has faded but the implications continue to unfold. It is the chapter where the crime no longer dominates the present, but reshapes it subtly, persistently. Where a community learns that answers can arrive decades late and still demand to be reckoned with. Where a cold case, once solved, becomes a mirror held up to time itself, asking not what happened, but how it was allowed to last so long. The silence was gone. The mystery was gone. What remained was responsibility, to remember accurately, to act more carefully, and to understand that even when the past is finally spoken, it never stops speaking. The town learned, slowly, that closure is not an ending but a new condition, a different way of carrying the past. After the solved cold case stopped leading the evening news and slid into the archives, it resurfaced in quieter places, in private moments that never made headlines. It appeared in the way people paused before answering questions about where they were from, in the way a familiar last name still caused a flicker of recognition, in the way silence no longer felt empty but crowded with memory. For years, the story had been framed around absence. A body found, a life cut short, a suspect never named. Now absence had been replaced by presence, and presence was harder to manage. The truth had weight. It demanded space. It changed conversations that once felt safe. People who had lived their entire adult lives under the shadow of the mystery now had to reorient themselves. The unknown had been a constant companion. Knowing felt strangely unfamiliar. In living rooms across the parish, families revisited old memories with new eyes. A strange neighbor. A tense interaction. A night when something felt off but was quickly explained away. These moments, once insignificant, now glowed with uncomfortable relevance. It wasn't that the truth had been obvious. It was that it had been possible. And that realization unsettled people more than the crime itself. The confession, though documented and verified, remained oddly intangible. No courtroom drama had followed. No cross-examination. No jury deliberation. The facts existed on paper, supported by evidence, signed off by authorities, yet they lacked the ritual of public judgment. Some residents felt robbed of a moment they had imagined for decades. Others were relieved to avoid it. The cold case was solved, but it did not satisfy the hunger for spectacle that unresolved crimes often build over time. For the victim's family, the 8th year after the confession marked a subtle shift. They spoke less about the crime itself and more about the years around it. Birthdays missed. Holidays altered. Careers chosen or abandoned. They began to understand that the crime was not a single event frozen in time, but a force that had shaped every decision that followed. The solved cold case had clarified the origin of that force, but it could not undo its momentum. In private moments, some family members admitted to feelings they struggled to articulate. Relief, yes. But also guilt. Guilt for feeling lighter when the man responsible never faced trial. Guilt for moments of peace that felt undeserved. Counselors explained that these emotions were common, that closure often brings contradictions. The family listened, nodded, and continued navigating a reality that had no roadmap. The suspect's name, once just a rumor, now carried official weight. But with that weight came complications. Relatives of the man faced their own reckoning. They had lost someone too, not to murder, but to revelation. They were forced to reconcile the person they knew with the person described in investigative reports. Some withdrew from the community. Others stayed and endured the stares, the unspoken questions, the quiet recalibration of trust. In local churches, sermons subtly shifted. Without naming the case directly, pastors spoke about truth emerging late, about sins carried silently, about the burden of unspoken guilt. Congregants listened, some with tears, others with clenched jaws. The solved cold case had become a moral reference point, a reminder that secrets do not expire, that time does not neutralize wrongdoing. Law enforcement agencies from neighboring counties reached out, asking for insight. How had the confession been handled? What protocols ensured its reliability? Could similar approaches be applied elsewhere? Detectives involved in the case found themselves unexpectedly positioned as experts in resolution without prosecution. They spoke carefully, emphasizing humility. They reminded colleagues that every case is different, that timing, psychology, and chance play enormous roles. Cold case units across the state cited the investigation as proof that persistence matters even when odds seem low. Funding proposals referenced it. Training sessions discussed it. The case became part of a broader narrative about modern investigative techniques intersecting with human frailty. It was no longer just a local tragedy. It was a data point in a national conversation. Yet for those who lived there, abstraction felt hollow. The case was not a lesson. It was lived experience. Every time a documentary crew called or a podcast producer emailed, the community faced a decision: participate or protect. Some agreed to speak, hoping to honor the victim. Others refused, exhausted by decades of attention. They had already given enough. The physical landscape bore quiet marks of the past. The road where the crime occurred had been repaved, widened, renamed. New houses stood where fields once stretched. But certain landmarks remained unchanged. A bend in the road. A cluster of trees. People passing those spots felt a tightening in the chest, an involuntary memory triggered by place rather than thought. The solved cold case had not erased geography. It had inscribed it. Younger residents, born long after 1975, encountered the story as inherited memory. They learned about it from parents, teachers, older siblings. To them, it sounded almost mythic. A crime that waited decades for a voice to speak. A confession that arrived too late for justice as they understood it. They asked questions older generations struggled to answer. Why didn't anyone know? Why didn't he say something sooner? Why did it take so long? There were no satisfying answers. Only explanations shaped by context, fear, and human complexity. The cold case forced each generation to confront uncomfortable truths about how communities function, about how silence can feel safer than suspicion, about how evil often hides behind familiarity. As years passed, anniversaries of the confession drew less attention. Newspapers stopped marking them. Television crews moved on. But the impact did not fade. It settled into the background, influencing behavior in subtle ways. People trusted differently. They listened more closely. They hesitated before dismissing concerns. The solved case had recalibrated vigilance. In moments of reflection, some residents admitted that part of them missed the mystery. The unanswered question had once united them, given them something to rally around. Resolution fractured that unity, revealing differences in how people process truth. Some embraced it. Others resisted it. A few quietly questioned it, unable or unwilling to let go of alternative narratives they had nurtured for years. This resistance did not change the facts, but it revealed something deeper, that closure is not a single destination, but a series of choices. To accept. To believe. To move forward. The cold case offered answers, but it could not force acceptance. That had to come from within. The 8th chapter of this story unfolds not with sirens or interrogations, but with aftershocks. With the realization that solving a crime does not end its influence. It transforms it. The mystery that once consumed the town now lived on as a lesson, a caution, a scar. The deathbed confession had broken decades of silence, but it had also opened a new one. A quieter silence. One filled with reflection rather than speculation. With memory rather than rumor. With a shared understanding that some truths arrive too late to punish, but never too late to matter. And so the story continued, not as a headline, not as a cold case, but as a presence woven into daily life. A reminder that time does not heal all wounds, but it does change their shape. That justice does not always arrive in courtrooms. And that when the past finally speaks, the present must learn how to listen. Time did what it always does when a story refuses to fade. It pressed the case deeper into the fabric of ordinary life, until its edges were no longer sharp but ever present. The solved cold case stopped being something people talked about and became something they carried. It lived in the pauses between sentences, in the way conversations shifted when the past was mentioned, in the instinctive lowering of voices when certain years were referenced. The mystery was gone, but its gravity remained. In courtrooms across the state, judges cited the case in discussions about evidentiary preservation and posthumous accountability. Law schools debated it as a hypothetical stripped of emotion, focusing on procedure, chain of custody, and the legal weight of a deathbed confession. Students argued whether justice had truly been served. The debate was clean, intellectual, detached. In Louisiana, those conversations felt foreign. Justice there had never been abstract. It had been personal, slow, and uneven. The victim's family found themselves slowly stepping out of the public eye. They declined interviews. They stopped responding to letters from strangers who claimed to feel connected to the story. Their lives had been shaped by the crime long enough. Now they wanted something quieter. They wanted days that were not defined by a date in 1975 or by a confession spoken decades later. They wanted normality, even if normal would never be simple. Some members of the family moved away. New cities. New routines. They learned that distance did not erase memory, but it softened it. In places where no one knew their last name, they could choose when to speak about the past and when to let it rest. Others stayed, anchored by familiarity, by gravesites, by the belief that leaving would feel like surrender. Both choices were valid. Both carried weight. The solved cold case also forced a reevaluation of loyalty. Friendships that had survived decades of rumor now felt fragile under the clarity of truth. Some relationships strengthened, built on shared grief and mutual understanding. Others fractured, undone by the realization that assumptions had been wrong, that trust had been misplaced, or that silence had been mistaken for innocence. In small moments, the town confronted its own reflection. A community bulletin board posted a notice about a missing pet, and someone commented, half joking, half serious, "At least this won't turn into another cold case." Laughter followed, thin and uneasy. Humor had returned, but it was careful now, aware of boundaries that had been redrawn. Local historians began documenting the case as part of the town's official narrative. Not sensationalized. Not dramatized. Just recorded. Dates. Names. Verified facts. They understood that if the story was not preserved accurately, it would be reshaped by myth. The solved cold case deserved better than rumor. It deserved precision. Archives were organized. Old photographs digitized. Police reports scanned and indexed. For the first time, the entire timeline existed in one place, accessible, orderly. The chaos of decades had been reduced to structure. It did not make the story less tragic, but it made it comprehensible. And comprehension, for some, was a form of peace. In academic circles, criminologists noted the psychological impact of unresolved crimes on communities and compared it to the aftermath of resolution without punishment. They cited increased vigilance followed by a slow emotional fatigue. People wanted to care, but caring for too long without release was exhausting. The case illustrated how closure can arrive quietly, without ceremony, leaving individuals to process it alone. Meanwhile, the physical evidence that had anchored the investigation rested in storage, labeled and sealed. It would likely never be handled again. Technicians who had once examined it retired. New technologies emerged that might have offered even more insight, had the suspect still been alive. Progress continued, indifferent to timing. The solved cold case became a marker of how far forensic science had come and how far it still might go. For some residents, the confession reopened spiritual questions they had long avoided. They asked whether forgiveness was possible when repentance came too late. Whether confession without consequence carried moral weight. Whether truth spoken at the edge of death was an act of courage or cowardice. Answers varied. Churches held discussion groups. Families argued quietly at dinner tables. The case had become a mirror for belief. The suspect's grave, unremarkable and unadorned, drew occasional visitors. Not mourners. Observers. People who stood at a distance, unsure what they felt. Anger. Curiosity. Emptiness. There were no flowers. No notes. Just footsteps that paused and then moved on. The man who had carried the secret for decades now lay beneath a name that meant something very different than it once had. In the years that followed, other cold cases were reopened across the state. Some were solved. Others were not. Each time, the 1975 case was mentioned as proof that answers can come late, but still matter. It became a quiet symbol of persistence, not triumph. A reminder that time does not absolve, but it does reveal. Young investigators entering the field heard the story early in their training. It was presented without drama, stripped to essentials. A crime. A silence. A confession. They were told to remember it when cases stalled, when leads dried up, when pressure mounted to move on. They were told that patience is not passive. That waiting is not the same as forgetting. The community, slowly, learned to live with the knowledge rather than around it. Festivals resumed their full scale. New businesses opened. Children grew up without the same shadow their parents had known. Yet the past was never erased. It was integrated. A layer beneath the present, informing it without overwhelming it. There were moments, still, when the weight returned unexpectedly. A song from the 70s played on the radio. A photograph surfaced in an old album. A name appeared in an obituary. Grief does not follow rules. It arrives when invited and when not. The solved cold case did not eliminate pain. It changed its timing. Part 9 exists in this long aftermath, where resolution has settled into routine, where shock has faded into understanding, and where the real work begins, living with truth. It is the chapter where the story no longer demands attention but continues to influence behavior, belief, and memory. The confession ended the mystery, but it did not end the conversation. It transformed it. From speculation to reflection. From accusation to accountability of a different kind. The town no longer asked who did it. It asked how it happened, how it was hidden, and how to prevent it from happening again. In the quietest moments, when night settled and the streets emptied, the solved cold case felt less like a solved puzzle and more like a lesson etched into time. A reminder that silence can last decades, that truth can wait, and that when it finally arrives, it changes everything it touches. The story moved forward not with sirens or headlines, but with breath. With days that passed. With people who carried on, altered but intact. The mystery was gone. The impact was not. And in that space between knowing and healing, the town continued, shaped forever by a crime that waited almost a lifetime to speak. By the time the story reached what anyone might call an ending, it no longer felt like an ending at all. It felt like a long exhale after holding breath for most of a lifetime. The solved cold case had settled into the town's consciousness not as a scar that demanded attention, but as a line that marked before and after. Everything now existed on one side or the other of that confession. In the 10th movement of this story, what mattered most was not what had happened in 1975, nor even what had been spoken decades later on a deathbed, but how people chose to live with the truth once it could no longer be questioned. Certainty, it turned out, was heavier than doubt. Doubt had allowed for imagination, for denial, for distance. Certainty sat still and demanded accommodation. Local institutions quietly adjusted. Police training manuals were revised. Evidence rooms were audited with new urgency. Old cases were reviewed not with optimism, but with discipline. The lesson was clear and unspoken: time does not forgive mistakes in documentation. Every photograph, every note, every bagged fragment could become the difference between silence and truth, even if that truth arrived decades late. In town council meetings, the case was never officially on the agenda, yet it hovered nearby. Discussions about funding for lighting on rural roads, about emergency call boxes, about community patrols were shaped by memory. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood why these measures mattered now more than ever. The solved cold case had taught them that prevention is quieter than investigation, and far less dramatic, but infinitely more important. The victim's family continued their slow retreat into privacy. They marked milestones differently now. Not by the date of the crime, but by the years since the truth was known. 1 year since. 5 years since. Each marker brought a different texture of emotion. The first was raw, unstable. The 5th carried something closer to balance. Not peace. Balance. The ability to remember without unraveling. There were moments of anger that surprised them even still. Anger at the man who waited so long. Anger at the system that could not force truth sooner. Anger at themselves for moments of relief. These emotions arrived without warning and left just as suddenly. Over time, they learned not to judge them. Feelings, they realized, were not verdicts. They were weather. The confession itself remained a strange artifact. Recorded, transcribed, reviewed, authenticated. It existed as sound and text, but it was never played publicly. Authorities resisted the urge to release it. They cited respect for the family. Others suspected caution. Either way, the voice that ended the mystery was never broadcast. It stayed locked away, known but unheard. For some, that felt appropriate. For others, frustrating. But perhaps it was fitting that the final truth arrived without spectacle. In the community, younger generations began asking different questions. Not who did it, but how people coped for so long without answers. They were less interested in the crime than in the waiting. They asked parents and grandparents what it felt like to live with uncertainty year after year. The answers varied, but one theme returned again and again: you adapt. You build routines around absence. You normalize the unresolved until it becomes part of daily life. The solved cold case disrupted that normalization. It forced people to acknowledge how much they had absorbed without noticing. How fear had subtly shaped behavior. How trust had been rationed. How silence had been mistaken for stability. These realizations were uncomfortable, but they were also clarifying. The suspect's story, once the truth was known, became smaller. His name appeared less often. His photograph faded from memory. People stopped trying to understand him. They realized that explanation was not the same as understanding, and understanding was not the same as absolution. The case was never about him. It was about what his silence had done to others. Across the state, policymakers referenced the investigation when discussing statute of limitations reform and posthumous accountability. Could confessions after death be weighed differently? Should there be formal mechanisms for acknowledging guilt when prosecution is impossible? These discussions were complex and unresolved, but they were happening. The cold case had not only ended a mystery, it had opened a conversation. In the quiet corners of the town, life continued. Marriages, divorces, births, deaths. The ordinary cycle resumed its dominance. But occasionally, in the middle of something mundane, the past surfaced. A passing comment. A familiar road. A date on a calendar. The solved cold case no longer shouted. It whispered. Some residents found themselves dreaming about it. Not about the crime, but about moments of waiting. About unanswered phone calls. About long nights listening to the radio for updates that never came. Dreams are strange archivists. They preserve what waking life tries to discard. Even resolution could not reach everything the mind had stored away. There were still disagreements about the meaning of justice. Some believed justice had been denied because punishment never came. Others believed justice had arrived in the form of truth, however delayed. Most lived somewhere in between, holding conflicting ideas without trying to reconcile them. The cold case had taught them that not all questions have clean answers, and that insisting on them can do more harm than good. As years passed, the town's relationship with the story matured. It stopped defining itself by the crime and began defining itself by what followed. By resilience. By patience. By a willingness to look directly at uncomfortable facts without flinching. These were not traits chosen deliberately. They were learned through endurance. Local artists began referencing the case indirectly. A mural about memory. A poem about silence. A song about waiting. None of them named the crime, but everyone understood the source. Art offered a way to process what language could not. It transformed pain into expression, mystery into metaphor. The 10th chapter of this story is not loud. It does not chase adrenaline or shock. It is heavy with reflection. It exists in the long stretch after answers arrive, when there is nothing left to uncover and everything left to live with. It is about the slow work of integration, of allowing truth to settle without letting it consume. The solved cold case no longer belonged to investigators or journalists or even the family alone. It belonged to the collective memory of the place. A shared reference point. A reminder. A warning. It asked something of everyone who knew it: attention, humility, and a refusal to let time become an excuse. Late at night, when the town was quiet and the river moved steadily through darkness, there was a sense that the past had finally stopped demanding to be chased. It had been caught, named, understood as much as it ever would be. What remained was the future, shaped by that understanding. The confession had broken decades of silence, but it had also marked the beginning of responsibility. Responsibility to remember accurately. To speak sooner. To listen when something feels wrong. To preserve what might matter later. These lessons were not dramatic. They were practical. And perhaps that was the truest form of justice the case could offer. As this chapter closes, the story does not resolve into certainty or comfort. It settles into something quieter and more durable. Awareness. The cold case is solved. The echoes remain. And in those echoes, the town continues, changed not by the crime alone, but by the long wait for truth, and by the choice to keep living once it finally arrived.